The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of Sacramento. Golden streaks painted the sky, a serene backdrop to the usual rhythm of the city. But for Jordan Ellis, it was just another day, another drive home after a long, exhausting shift at the office. The hum of his sedan's engine was the only sound accompanying him as he adjusted the air conditioning, eager to let go of the day's stress. The radio played softly, a soothing antidote to the world around him. He slowed as he approached a yellow light, coming to a stop just as it turned red. The typical motions of driving home were disrupted in a flash when the sudden flash of blue and red lights erupted behind him. The sharp blare of a siren pierced the quiet, immediately throwing him off balance. Jordan's eyes narrowed slightly as he glanced into the rearview mirror. Officer Nathan Blackwell's cruiser rolled up behind him. The officer's posture was already a signal of authority as he parked behind Jordan's car, his boots scraping the asphalt as he made his way toward the sedan. Jordan had seen this routine before, but today something felt different. Blackwell's stance, head held high, chest puffed with confidence, spoke volumes. "License and registration," Blackwell said, his tone curt but with an underlying edge of command. Jordan complied without a word, his movements deliberate as he reached into the glove compartment. He handed over his driver's license and registration, his calm demeanor betraying nothing but an uncomfortable sense of unease building beneath the surface. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Blackwell asked, leaning slightly toward the window. His voice, though flat, seemed to carry a weight that made Jordan's brow furrow just a fraction. "I'm not entirely sure," Jordan replied, maintaining a polite yet firm tone. "I thought I slowed down in time at the light." A flicker of hesitation passed through Blackwell's eyes before he responded. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light." The words hung in the air, almost as if they didn't fully add up. Jordan nodded. "I see. I thought I had stopped, but I understand." The officer didn't respond right away, lingering as he scanned Jordan with a look that went beyond routine. Blackwell's gaze lingered, narrowing ever so slightly, as though he was searching for something more to this moment. Something deeper. "You're not from around here, are you?" Blackwell asked suddenly, his voice shifting subtly. Jordan hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding, his expression steady. "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Blackwell wasn't truly listening. His next question came with a little more force, and Jordan could feel the subtle shift in the officer's demeanor. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Just going home," Jordan replied, his tone unwavering, but the tension that suddenly filled the air was palpable. There was something more in Blackwell's gaze now, something that suggested his assumptions were already in motion. Without warning, Blackwell's posture changed, an imperceptible shift that signaled the move from a routine stop to something more. His suspicion grew, and with it, his need to assert control. "Step out of the car for me," Blackwell ordered, his words direct, his voice clipped. Jordan's grip on the steering wheel tightened, but his face remained an unreadable mask. "Is there a specific reason for that, officer?" he asked, his voice even, a slight edge of confusion masking the rising tension within. Blackwell's lips curled into a slight smirk, but it was forced. His eyes narrowed. "I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The threat wasn't spoken outright, but it was clear enough. Jordan took a slow breath and opened the door. As he stepped out of the car, Blackwell's gaze flicked over him, sizing him up. Jordan stood just slightly taller than Blackwell, his broad shoulders a striking contrast to the officer's narrow frame. His tailored suit, polished shoes, and unshakable calm demeanor seemed out of place in this moment, a stark contrast to the officer's rigid control. "Hands where I can see them," Blackwell barked. His voice was sharp as he gestured toward the front of the car. Jordan complied, his hands raised slightly, his movements deliberate. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" he asked, the calmness in his tone cutting through the rising tension between them. Blackwell smirked faintly. "Just routine. We've had some incidents around here." "Can't be too careful," he muttered, stepping closer to Jordan. Jordan turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Blackwell. Incidents involving men in business, suits, driving sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Blackwell's posture faltered, his lips parting as though caught off guard. The question had landed like a punch, one that caught the officer off guard. For a brief second, Blackwell's composure slipped, and Jordan could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But instead of backing down, the officer pressed on. His hand drifted toward his belt, more out of reflex than necessity. "Watch your tone," Blackwell warned, his voice hardening as he took another step forward. "I'm simply asking a question." Jordan's response came without hesitation, calm but firm. "No, officer. I'm just asking for transparency." The tension between them had reached a boiling point. Blackwell's frustration was palpable. His voice had sharpened, and his eyes gleamed with something darker now, something that Jordan recognized all too well. "Fairness? You think fairness is what this is about?" Blackwell spat, the words tainted with an edge of something far worse. He paused, then his eyes narrowed. "People like you always." The words trailed off, hanging in the air like smoke, and for the first time, Jordan saw the true nature of the officer's prejudice, the assumptions that had guided his every action from the moment he had approached Jordan's car. The tension in the air was suffocating. Jordan stood firm, unwavering, his eyes steady as Blackwell took a step back, seemingly reassessing the situation. "You know what I mean," Blackwell muttered, his voice losing some of its earlier conviction. Jordan didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, his response was measured, calm, but unmistakable. "I think I do," Jordan said quietly, his voice cold as steel. This interaction stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago. And with those words, everything shifted. The balance of power had changed. And now, the real test was just beginning. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Officer Blackwell's eyes flicked nervously between Jordan and the badge on his chest. The words that had been left unsaid now hung in the air, suffocating the space between them. Blackwell's jaw tightened, the subtle shift in his posture signaling a shift in power. He wasn't sure how to regain control, and it unnerved him. Jordan remained calm, his eyes locked on Blackwell's with an unyielding steadiness. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. His quiet demeanor wasn't a sign of submission. It was a clear assertion of his own command over the situation. Blackwell's fingers tapped nervously against his belt, his mind racing to regain his usual control. His voice came out harsher this time, a crack betraying his frustration. "You seem pretty confident," he muttered, as if trying to assert his dominance again. "Like you think you know what's going to happen next." Jordan didn't flinch. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." The words cut through the tension like a knife. The shift in power was now undeniable. Blackwell was on the back foot, his earlier swagger evaporating as he processed the deeper layers of the encounter. His movements became more agitated, a mix of confusion and instinctive defensiveness. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Blackwell shot back, his voice rising. He took a step forward, but the step was uncertain, tentative. The power he had once held now felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Jordan took a breath, his gaze unwavering. "No, officer, but I think you owe me an explanation for why this has escalated to this point. This started as a simple traffic stop, but now it's become something much more." Blackwell's expression hardened, his anger flaring up like a fire he couldn't put out. "I don't need a lesson on fairness from you," he spat, his eyes narrowing with increasing suspicion. "You think you know how this works? You think you can talk your way out of this?" Jordan's gaze was unyielding. "I don't need to talk my way out of anything. I just believe in transparency, in fairness. That's the problem here. Officer, there's none of that in your actions." The words hung in the air like an indictment, sharp and accusatory. For a moment, Blackwell was left speechless, the weight of Jordan's quiet authority pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The officer's eyes darted to the sedan, as if looking for something to justify his actions, something to reinforce the narrative he'd already constructed. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized there was nothing. Nothing but his own assumptions, his own biases. Jordan, sensing the moment of weakness, took a step forward. You're not looking for a reason to uphold the law. You're looking for a reason to exert control, to put me in my place. His voice was calm, but the words hit like a punch. Blackwell's face reddened. He had no defense, none that would hold water. The facade of authority he had carried into this interaction was crumbling, piece by piece. You're right, Blackwell finally admitted, his voice quieter now, a little less certain. You got a lot of questions, and I don't like it. Jordan's expression didn't change, but his eyes, sharp and knowing, caught Blackwell off guard. The officer's bravado had been dismantled, leaving him vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, Blackwell's frustration grew, pushing him to assert even more control. Turn around and put your hands on the hood, Blackwell commanded. His voice still clipped, though a flicker of uncertainty lingered. Jordan hesitated only for a moment, his mind weighing the decision, before he complied. Slowly, he placed his hands flat against the hood of the car, the cool metal beneath his palms grounding him. The officer approached him with an intensity that didn't match his earlier aggression. This time, there was something else, something far less certain in Blackwell's movements. "Watch yourself," Blackwell muttered as he began patting Jordan down. His hands moved roughly, lingering too long, clearly an attempt to assert dominance, to remind Jordan who held the power. But Jordan didn't flinch, didn't stiffen. His body was calm, almost unnervingly so. He knew exactly what Blackwell was trying to do, and he wouldn't give the officer the satisfaction. "You're clean," Blackwell grumbled, stepping back with a hint of irritation, as though Jordan's calmness had somehow become an affront to his authority. Jordan straightened, turning to face Blackwell, his gaze unwavering. "Of course I am," he said simply. "Now, officer, if you're done." Blackwell, still fuming, cut him off. "I'm not done," he snapped, clearly agitated. "You seem to know an awful lot about how this works. Care to explain why?" Jordan folded his arms, his posture relaxed despite the storm brewing in the officer's eyes. "I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement," he replied, his tone measured. "Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years. Let me guess, are you a lawyer or something?" Blackwell asked, his voice laced with mockery. Jordan smiled faintly, a knowing, enigmatic smile. "Or something." The officer's frustration deepened, his steps growing more aggressive as he took another step forward. He invaded Jordan's personal space, his breath heavier now as his voice dropped to a near growl. "You think you're smarter than me, huh? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Jordan met Blackwell's gaze evenly, unflinching. "I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness. And so far, I'm not seeing much of that here." Blackwell recoiled slightly at the challenge in Jordan's voice. He wasn't used to being questioned, much less confronted in this way. The words lingered, but neither man spoke them. They both knew what had been said and what had yet to come. The officer's face twisted in frustration, his control slipping further. He stepped back, pacing in a small circle, his boots scraping the pavement. "You seem pretty confident. You know that?" he muttered almost to himself. Jordan didn't rise to the bait. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is," he repeated, his voice steady, unfazed. But Blackwell's anger was rising. "You know what?" he muttered, his hands twitching near his holster. "I'm done talking. Let's get this over with." The tension in the air thickened as Officer Blackwell's frustration reached its peak. His movements were no longer controlled. Each step seemed driven by an instinctive need to reassert the power he was rapidly losing. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, unsure of how to proceed, but certain of one thing. This situation was no longer just about a traffic stop. It was about control. His control. Jordan stood unwavering, his posture still calm and composed, but his eyes held something far more powerful, certainty. He knew what was coming next. He could feel the power shift beneath his feet, the moment when Blackwell would finally realize the true nature of their interaction. Blackwell's voice broke the silence. "You don't seem like the typical guy I pull over. What are you hiding, huh?" His words were harsh, the underlying suspicion still bubbling beneath the surface, but they didn't land. They didn't have the sting they once might have. Jordan, however, didn't react the way most people would. He had been preparing for this moment, and now it was time to reveal everything. Jordan's voice cut through the tension like a blade, clear and steady, but with a weight that carried far more than just the words. "Officer, I think it's time you know who I am." Blackwell froze for a second, his eyes narrowing. There was something about Jordan's tone, something final about it that unsettled him. The officer's instincts flared, his hand subtly twitching toward his belt, but his gaze never wavered from Jordan's unflinching stare. "You think I care who you are?" Blackwell shot back, his voice sharp, though it trembled with a hint of doubt. Jordan's lips barely moved as he spoke next, his voice calm but filled with unspoken authority. "I'm the head of internal affairs for the Sacramento Police Department, and you, Officer Blackwell, just made a mistake." The words hung in the air for a long moment, but their weight crashed down hard on Blackwell, freezing him in place. His expression shifted from one of uncertainty to disbelief, his mind struggling to process the revelation. Internal affairs. Jordan Ellis. The man standing before him wasn't just another driver. He wasn't just some random citizen. He was the one who held the power to decide the future of officers like him. The shift in Blackwell's posture was instant. His eyes darted between Jordan's face and the badge he now held out, a gleaming piece of authority that was impossible to ignore. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't, but there it was, undeniable and damning. Jordan's voice remained unwavering as he continued, his gaze steady. "I oversee officer conduct, Blackwell. My job is to ensure the integrity of this department and to hold those who wear this badge accountable." For the first time since the traffic stop began, Blackwell's expression faltered. His previously smug demeanor, the one that had guided his every step, began to crumble. His eyes flicked to the badge in Jordan's hand, then back to his face, searching for a hint of jest. There was none. There was no humor, no mockery, just quiet authority and a subtle disappointment. "Internal affairs?" Blackwell repeated, his voice cracking slightly, disbelief still lingering in the air. His body language was now visibly defensive, stepping back, hands twitching as if unsure what to do next. Jordan nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Blackwell's face. "Yes, officer, and I've been watching this entire exchange." The truth settled in, like a weight crashing into the officer's chest. The swagger, the authority, the false sense of power, all of it unraveled in an instant. Blackwell was no longer the one in control. He had just revealed himself to be exactly the type of officer Jordan was tasked with monitoring. And now, the consequences of that revelation would unfold. The seconds that passed felt like hours to Blackwell. He swallowed hard, his hands slowly falling away from his belt, his chest tightening with the realization that he had just exposed himself, his biases, his prejudices, and his misuse of power, without even knowing who he was confronting. Jordan took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance that Blackwell had instinctively tried to create. "Do you know what the most troubling part of this interaction has been, Officer Blackwell?" Jordan's voice was steady, but it carried the full weight of someone who had seen this all too many times. Blackwell's gaze flickered, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. He was trapped, exposed, and unsure of how to regain his footing. "It's not the profiling," Jordan continued, his words laced with an unflinching truth. "It's not the baseless escalation either. It's the fact that you've done all of this without even realizing who you were talking to." Jordan's words cut deeper than anything Blackwell had anticipated. The officer's face flushed a deep red, his body tense with frustration and humiliation. He had assumed, without hesitation, that Jordan was someone he could manipulate, someone who didn't belong. But now the tables had turned. Jordan's gaze never wavered as he pressed on, his tone unrelenting. "You assumed that I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you're sworn to uphold. And why? Because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving of respect." Blackwell's hand twitched near his holster again, but this time there was no confidence in the gesture. His body language had changed completely, no longer the posture of an officer in control, but of a man caught in his own ignorance. Jordan's voice softened slightly, but the weight of his words still lingered in the air. And that, Officer Blackwell, is the real problem. You didn't see me as someone worthy of your respect simply because of who I am. But you should have known better. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy. Blackwell stood frozen, his thoughts racing as he processed everything Jordan had just revealed. The power had shifted, and there was no going back. Jordan's expression remained unchanged as he added, "You may think that your badge gives you power, but the truth is, it makes you accountable to everyone you encounter." Blackwell's eyes darted back to the badge in Jordan's hand. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His confident demeanor, the one that had been so firmly planted from the beginning, had evaporated. Jordan's voice broke the silence once more, firm and commanding. "Now, take a step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what you say next." The officer's lip trembled, but his pride, still, just barely, kept him from backing down immediately. The hesitation, however, spoke volumes. "You're going to hear from me again," Jordan added, his tone low but filled with authority. "Not as a driver you stopped on the side of the road, but as the man tasked with deciding whether you're fit to wear that badge." The weight of the moment hung in the air as Blackwell stood frozen, his face now a mixture of disbelief and shame. His grip on his authority had slipped, and it wasn't just a momentary lapse. The truth of what Jordan had revealed to him began to settle in, a truth that would follow him for the rest of his career, and perhaps beyond. Jordan watched him for a beat longer, not out of malice, but to allow the officer to absorb the gravity of the situation. He knew Blackwell would try to regain some semblance of control, but the power dynamic had shifted beyond repair. It wasn't just about this stop anymore. It was about what Blackwell's actions represented, what they said about the system that had allowed them to continue unchecked. For a moment, Blackwell opened his mouth, his eyes darting nervously to his own belt as though searching for something to grasp onto. But there was nothing. No words came. No defense. He was just a man left exposed by his own prejudice, standing in the presence of someone who not only had the authority to expose him, but the duty to do so. Jordan's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression calm but unwavering. "The truth is, Officer Blackwell, you were never in control here." "Not really." Blackwell swallowed hard, the sound of it almost audible in the heavy silence between them. He forced himself to take a step back, his feet dragging slightly, as if trying to distance himself from the moment, from the realization that he had just made a life-altering mistake. His confidence had shattered. His facade crumbled. "Here's what's going to happen," Jordan said, his voice low, yet unwavering. "You're going to take a step back. You're going to return my documents, and then we're going to leave here. And you'll think very carefully about what comes next." The officer's hand shook as he reached into his chest pocket, pulling out Jordan's license and registration. The documents were handed back with trembling fingers, and for the first time since their encounter began, Blackwell seemed small. His pride, once so fiercely intact, had been stripped away by his own actions. Jordan took the papers without a word, sliding them into his wallet with deliberate slowness. The officer's gaze flickered to the badge in Jordan's hand once more, and it seemed to hit him all over again. Jordan wasn't just any driver. He wasn't someone who could be pushed around, disrespected, or overlooked. He was the one in charge here. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, as Blackwell stood motionless, his posture deflated. Jordan finally broke the silence, his voice steady but piercing. "Remember this, Officer Blackwell," he said, locking eyes with the officer one last time. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." Jordan didn't wait for a response. He turned and slid back into his car, the engine purring to life as he prepared to leave. Blackwell stood there, rooted to the spot, his body stiff with the weight of everything that had just happened. As Jordan drove away, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew the power of this moment would linger with Blackwell for much longer than the few seconds it had taken for him to hand back the documents. For Jordan, this was just another day, another interaction to hold the system accountable. But for Blackwell, this was the beginning of his reckoning. The drive home was quiet. The familiar hum of the car on the road was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Jordan's mind. The encounter with Blackwell had played out in his head over and over. Not because it was unique, Jordan had seen this type of behavior too many times, but because it wasn't just another incident. It was a reflection of something much bigger, a system that allowed this kind of behavior to persist unchecked. And Jordan knew it wouldn't stop with Blackwell. He wasn't the first officer to act this way, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. But Jordan had the authority now. He had the power to act. And the truth was, he wasn't going to stop until things began to change. The following morning, Jordan sat at his desk, the early sunlight streaming through the blinds of his office at the Sacramento Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. He was deep in thought as he stared at a file, one that had been left on his desk the night before. It was about Blackwell. It was about the officer's past, his record of complaints and investigations, all the warning signs that had never been properly addressed. The file was open in front of him, but Jordan's mind was already focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about Blackwell's actions. This was about the culture that had allowed officers like him to get away with such behavior. It wasn't just a handful of bad apples. It was a systemic issue, one that would take more than just disciplinary action to fix. His assistant, Kara, knocked on the door, interrupting his thoughts. She stepped in, holding a stack of reports, the usual early morning routine. "Morning, Mr. Ellis," she said, placing the files on his desk. "I've got the summary of last month's misconduct cases, and Chief James wanted to remind you about the department review next week." Jordan nodded, his eyes flicking to the papers in front of him. "Thanks, Kara. Can you schedule a meeting with Chief James for this afternoon? There's something I need to discuss with him." Kara hesitated for a moment, sensing the weight in Jordan's tone, but then nodded. "Of course, Mr. Ellis," she said, before slipping out of the room. Jordan leaned back his chair, his fingers steepled together as he stared at Blackwell's file. The officer's past, minor complaints about excessive stops, unprofessional conduct, and vague allegations of misconduct, was a story all too familiar. But it wasn't just Blackwell. It was the entire system that had allowed this kind of behavior to persist, unchecked, and that was exactly what Jordan was about to confront. He wasn't going to just sweep it under the rug like so many before him. The work ahead wouldn't be easy, and it would ruffle more than a few feathers. But Jordan was ready. This wasn't about one man's mistakes. It was about the culture that needed to change. The time had come to act. The weight of what Jordan had done the previous day lingered in the back of his mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. The encounter with Officer Blackwell was just the beginning. The real work had only just started. For the first time in a long while, Jordan felt the full gravity of his role as head of internal affairs pressing down on him. He wasn't just a man tasked with overseeing complaints. He was now the one leading the charge for real, systemic change. The next morning was filled with a flood of new reports and cases, everything from minor complaints to deeper investigations into misconduct. Kara had organized the files in neat stacks on his desk, each one a reminder of the task ahead. As he sifted through them, Jordan couldn't help but notice the same patterns. Officers treating civilians with disrespect, escalations over minor issues, an unspoken culture of fear and control that had persisted within the department for far too long. This was bigger than Blackwell. The truth was, the officer was just a symptom of a much larger issue. Jordan knew that if he was going to make any meaningful change, he needed to dig deeper, start addressing the core of the problem. At noon, Kara stepped in again, interrupting his thoughts. This time, she had a different look on her face. "Mr. Ellis, Chief James is waiting for you in his office. He said it's urgent." Jordan pushed back from his desk, standing up and straightening his suit. He had been expecting this meeting, the one where the internal review would begin to take shape. But even so, there was a sense of unease hanging in the air. He wasn't sure how James would react to his proposed changes, to the idea of confronting the very culture that had allowed officers like Blackwell to thrive. As he entered Chief James' office, he was greeted with a nod. The seasoned veteran, his salt and pepper hair framing his face, looked up from the stack of paperwork on his desk. James was always a man of few words, but his presence commanded respect. Jordan sat down without wasting time, looking directly at the chief. "I want to talk to you about the department review," he began, his tone serious. "It's time for a full overhaul. We need to start addressing the deep-rooted issues within this department. We can't keep letting things slide under the radar." James didn't say anything at first. He merely folded his hands and leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed what Jordan had just said. The silence between them was palpable, but it didn't feel awkward. It felt like the beginning of something significant. Finally, James spoke, his voice measured. "You're going to ruffle some feathers with this, Jordan. A lot of people aren't going to be happy with the changes you want to make. We've always handled things quietly. The complaints, the investigations, they've been brushed aside or dealt with internally." Jordan leaned forward, his expression unwavering. "And that's the problem, Chief. Quiet doesn't fix anything. It just lets the same problems continue. We can't afford to be silent anymore. If we want the community to trust us, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We need to be loud." James sighed, rubbing his temples. The weight of the conversation was sinking in. "This isn't going to be easy," he warned. "But I'm listening. You know I've always had your back, Jordan. If you think this is the right move, I'll back you." The tension in the room eased slightly as Jordan felt the chief's support. He nodded, knowing that this was a turning point. "I'm not just talking about one man, Chief. I'm talking about the culture, about the officers who think they can get away with anything because no one is holding them accountable. It's time to make some real changes." James' gaze softened, though there was still a deep-seated concern in his eyes. "You're right. We've been putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds for too long. But how far are you willing to go? There are a lot of powerful people within this department who won't want to rock the boat." Jordan's expression remained resolute. "I'm willing to go all the way, Chief. It's about more than just one officer. It's about the people we're sworn to protect. If we don't start holding ourselves accountable, then we've failed them." The chief's eyes locked onto Jordan's, and for a brief moment, there was a mutual understanding. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was the only road that mattered. Jordan left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. The department-wide review would begin, and nothing would stop him from getting to the truth. There were still more officers like Blackwell, more cases of misconduct that had been buried beneath the surface. But Jordan was ready to face them head-on. As he walked back to his office, he couldn't help but think about the next step. The community needed to be involved. The officers, too. Change wouldn't happen in a vacuum. It would require a full-scale effort, a collective commitment to rebuilding trust both within the department and with the people they served. Later that afternoon, Jordan was in the middle of reviewing more files when Kara returned to his office. "Mr. Ellis, there's something you need to see." She handed him a manila folder, her eyes darting nervously. Jordan opened it, scanning the contents. Inside were reports of several more incidents, each one more alarming than the last. Excessive force, racial profiling, abuse of power, all patterns that had gone unchecked for far too long. "This is what we were up against," Jordan muttered to himself, staring at the page in front of him. He didn't need to look up to know Kara was still standing there, waiting for direction. "We're going to fix this," Jordan said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "It's time to take action, and this starts now." The days following the meeting with Chief James were a whirlwind of activity. Jordan threw himself into the department-wide review with everything he had, driven by a sense of urgency that couldn't be ignored. He knew the task ahead was monumental. If he was going to bring about the change he wanted, he would have to face the deepest parts of the department's culture, the parts that no one wanted to acknowledge. The review wasn't just about compiling data or filing reports. It was about shaking the very foundation of the department. Jordan had made it clear from the start. This couldn't be a quiet, internal investigation. It had to be transparent, public, and impossible to ignore. As the review began, the first round of meetings was scheduled with officers, detectives, and other department members. Jordan's reputation was known throughout the department, but it was different now. His role as head of internal affairs had always been seen as a distant, neutral force, a system that simply dealt with complaints and investigations. But now, it was clear to everyone that Jordan was not just a passive observer. He was a force for change. The first meeting didn't go as smoothly as Jordan had hoped. He stood before a room full of officers, the tension palpable in the air. The walls of the conference room seemed to close in on him, the weight of what he was about to say making his heart beat faster. These were the men and women who had been part of the system for years. Many of them had never been challenged like this. "I don't need to tell you why we're here," Jordan began, his voice steady, though the gravity of the situation hung over him. "What we've allowed to happen within this department is not just a few bad decisions. It's a culture that has become toxic, one that has undermined the trust of the very people we're meant to protect." The officers in a room shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, while others stared at him with suspicion, even defiance. Jordan could feel the resistance growing, the walls they had built around themselves starting to form again. But he couldn't back down now. He knew that for every person who resisted change, there would be another who would stand behind him. "This isn't about one bad apple," Jordan continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This is about a system that has allowed those apples to thrive. It's about the officers who think they can get away with anything because no one is watching. And it stops now." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. No one spoke. No one dared. And then, from the back of the room, a voice broke through the tension. "Who do you think you are, Ellis?" It was one of the senior officers, a man named Captain Drew. His tone was laced with contempt, his posture stiff with defiance. "You've been with this department for what, 5 years? You're talking like you're some kind of savior, like we're all the problem." Jordan held Captain Drew's gaze without flinching. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. "I'm not here to be a savior. I'm here to make sure that everyone who wears this badge knows that they're held accountable. This isn't personal. This is about righting the wrongs that have gone on for too long." The captain scoffed, shaking his head. "You're going to try and take down the whole department over a few bad cases? You're asking for a disaster." Jordan could feel the tension rising again, but he wasn't about to let it derail him. "I'm not here to destroy this department, Captain. I'm here to rebuild it. And if you're not on board with that, then maybe it's time you step aside." There was a moment of stunned silence before Jordan continued. "The people of Sacramento deserve better. We owe them that. And I'll be damned if I let a few bad officers drag us all down. This isn't about us. It's about them. It's about the people who trust us to do the right thing." Captain Drew's face reddened, but he didn't say another word. The room was still. The officers in the room exchanged uncertain glances, the challenge having shifted to them. This wasn't about one man's mistake anymore. This was about their collective responsibility. Jordan let the silence stretch out, knowing the weight of his words had landed. This department has a chance to be something better, something that the people of this city can rely on. But only if we're willing to look at ourselves and make the hard choices. The next few days were filled with interviews, meetings, and long hours spent reviewing cases and discussing the issues that had come alight. Jordan worked tirelessly, not just with the officers, but with the community as well. He held public forums, listening to residents' concerns, gathering feedback, and ensuring that the people who had been directly affected by the department's actions had a voice in the process. It was messy, it was uncomfortable, but it was necessary, and it wasn't just about exposing the bad officers. It was about creating a space where change could happen, a space where the officers who were committed to doing the right thing could thrive without fear of being dragged down by the ones who didn't belong. As the days passed, Jordan could feel the shift happening slowly but surely. The officers who had once been resistant to change now found themselves questioning their own behavior. The community, too, started to respond. They began to see that the department was willing to do the work necessary to restore trust. But there was still so much left to be done. That afternoon, after one of the most intense meetings yet, Kara came into Jordan's office with a new stack of reports. "Mr. Ellis," she said quietly, "there's a meeting with Chief James scheduled for tomorrow. He wants an update on the review." Jordan looked at the papers, then back at Kara. "Tell him we're on the right track. But we're not done yet. Not by a long shot." The weeks that followed were a blur of long hours, heated debates, and difficult decisions. The department review had become the catalyst for something far larger than anyone had anticipated. What started as an internal investigation had blossomed into a movement, one that threatened to shake the very foundation of the police force and, in many ways, the city itself. But for Jordan Ellis, it was simply the beginning. He stood before the podium, the weight of the room pressing down on him. Officers, city officials, community leaders, and residents filled the hall, their eyes focused on him. This wasn't just a regular meeting. It was the culmination of months of work, months of pushing against resistance, months of demanding accountability. Jordan had seen the department begin to change. It wasn't a smooth transition, and there were still bumps along the way, but the foundation was being laid. There were still officers like Captain Drew, resistant, bitter, unwilling to see the light. But there were also others, quiet supporters who knew the change was needed and who were ready to step up and lead. As Jordan prepared to speak, he took a deep breath, his mind flashing back to the first moment he'd encountered Officer Blackwell, the moment that had set everything in motion. The fear, the arrogance, the sense of control that Blackwell had tried to assert. But that moment had also shown him the true power of what was possible. It had shown him that the system could be changed. It had shown him that he could be the one to lead that change. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady but filled with an intensity that commanded attention. I stand before you today, not as a man seeking applause or accolades, but as someone who believes deeply in the promise of justice, he began, his eyes scanning the room. I believe in a police department that stands for fairness, that upholds integrity, that is accountable not just to itself, but to the very people we're sworn to protect. And I believe in a department that is willing to change. The room was silent, the only sound the faint rustle of papers. Change isn't easy, Jordan continued, his voice rising with each word. It requires us to look in the mirror, to ask ourselves the difficult questions, and to make decisions that aren't always popular. But it's the only way we can move forward. The time for silence has passed. The time for complacency is over. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. The department review we've conducted wasn't just about finding problems. It was about finding solutions. It was about creating a system where officers like Officer Blackwell are held accountable, where the mistakes of the past are not swept under the rug, and where the public can have confidence in us once again. A murmur rippled through the room. Jordan could feel the energy shift. It wasn't just words anymore. It was action. We have a lot of work left to do, Jordan continued. But we've made a start. We've created a foundation where transparency is key, where accountability is non-negotiable, and where we, as a department, are committed to rebuilding the trust we've lost. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as he added, "This isn't just about one officer's mistake. It's about a culture that has allowed those mistakes to persist. And I'll be damned if we don't change that." There was a moment of silence, and then, unexpectedly, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it was genuine. Officers who had once been skeptical now stood in quiet approval. Community leaders nodded in agreement. And the residents who had been demanding change for years now felt a glimmer of hope that it might actually come. Jordan stepped back from the podium, his heart racing. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The work would continue, the challenges would persist, and there would be more battles to fight. But for the first time in a long while, he felt that this fight was winnable. Later that evening, as Jordan sat alone in his office, reflecting on the events of the day, Kara came in, her voice quiet but warm. "Mr. Ellis, I just wanted to say, I think we've made a real difference." Jordan smiled, but it was a tired smile. "It's a start, but it's just the beginning. We've got a long road ahead of us." He looked out the window, watching as the last light of the day began to fade behind the city skyline. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed full of possibility. The next day, Jordan received a call. It was a reminder of just how much work was still to be done. There had been new complaints, new incidents, new officers who had slipped through the cracks. But for the first time, Jordan didn't feel overwhelmed. He didn't feel discouraged. He felt resolute. He was ready for whatever came next, because the change had begun, and it wasn't going to stop now. Before you go, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to know your corner of the world. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next unforgettable adventure. Here's a quick question for you. What do you think is the most important step in bringing about real change within systems of authority? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your perspectives.